Today is July 11th, 2011, and I'm here with Rod Nackerman. And the first question I want to ask is, when did your family first come to the island?
My great-grandfather, Pete McCauley, came to the island about 1886, I believe. And he settled in Nomads, which was the other island of the other end of the island. There was a little settlement over there. And he was a fisherman. They raised 14 children, and eventually they all left the island except my grandmother, and she came down to Barney's Lake Road, and her husband, Fred, he had come from Elk Rapids, Michigan. They were married in a little church in Nomad, 1881, of all crazy things, on the 18th of January of a year. Must have been a chilly day for wedding. But anyway, they settled in there, and they had first they built a log house, and they did all right with that. But then in 1904, they settled the farmhouse, or built the farmhouse, and then the old house they just tore down eventually. And they only had one child, and that was my dad, and his name was Frank. But it was a little peculiar because they were married for 22 years before they had a child. And they stayed in that house, and my dad went to school there and graduated from school, high school, St. James High School was at that time. And he went to college, which was quite rare in that days. He went to University of Detroit for two years. And his mother was kind of pretty anxious for him to come back home, so he quit school, and he worked in the auto plants for a while, and met my mother in Pontiac, on Cherry Street of Pontiac. And by coincidence, I met my wife in Grand Rapids, also on Cherry Street in Grand Rapids. So anyway, when they came back to Beaver Island, there was no jobs at all. I mean, it was during the Depression, and it was really bad. They were married in 1926. So my dad, he served as treasurer and supervisor in the other township, and made a little money in that. Now, all this time, my grandfather, Fred, he was bricklayer, and there was no bricks to be laid on Beaver Island. So every spring, he would go away, go to the UP, sometimes Canada, wherever the big commercial buildings were being built. And then he'd come back along by the 1st of December. Then, in the meantime, my grandmother, she wanted to be a farmer, so she would hire local people to plant the things, cropped and everything. They had chickens and turkeys and, sheep, a few cows, and one horse, but the horse died. Well, then, my dad worked as in WPA. That was a government program for unemployed people, and he didn't like it very well. He most of the time he would people tell me that he would stand on the shovel and talk. Mostly that's his thing. So didn't have a steady whip. In the meantime, we had five children. A fourth. There's myself and my four sisters. Mm. So he wangled a job as postmaster on the island through political pull, and he was very happy. That was just his thing. And eventually he stayed with that for almost 39 years as postmaster.
Do you know about what time he became postmaster? What year?
Yes. 1939.
Okay.
And because they lived out in the country in the wintertime, the plows were not, they didn't go to that road. You had to go up to by where the gas station is now, by the cemetery there, and then either leave the car there or else walk to town. But eventually, we couldn't get, the school moved to town, so we all had to transfer down to town, and we would rent houses for a while, maybe 4 or 5 years. And then my dad bought the post office, and then by that time I was 17 or 18, and I helped him remodel it upstairs so that they could live upstairs. Now, let me see. For myself, do you want to talk about me? Mm-hmm. Okay. I left the island when I was 17. I had already graduated from high school. I went to Pontiac, and I worked at a gas station, which I loved that work. And it was time for military draft, so I enlisted in the Air Force. And I served most of the time in Florida, which was a good be. I traveled a lot. I went to North Africa. I went to England, Alaska, North Dakota, various places. We'd always come back. I was a crew chief on a B-47 6-engine jet bomber. Wow. So, I have told some of this, but I'll tell again. In the meantime, when I was in the Air Force, there were 6 young women from Beaver Island in nursing school in Grand Rapids, St. Mary's. The girls from Beaver Island would write to the guys in the Air Force, or in the Air Force or military. So some of them girls suggested that maybe I should write to me, and I liked that very well. I'd been in the service about a year at that time and had already gone to Florida. So I started writing. I never met this girl, and there were several other boys that were writing to her, but apparently I wrote a little better letters than. And so we got to writing back and forth. Well, then Christmas came along. I was going to drive her from Florida with some other guys. So I called her. I said, "Do you want me to come and see you?" And she says, "Oh, I'll probably be busy." So I came back to the island, and I didn't even meet her at that time. But we kept writing for another whole year. And eventually we had a date. But to make a long story short, she didn't like it very well at first, but then we kept writing. So over a period of 3.5 years, we wrote to each other, and we only saw total days of 30 days before we got married. Because we knew each other really well, from there. So we got married in Cadillac, Michigan, and a lot of the young fellows from Beaver Island that I knew, and a lot of the nurses from Grand Rapids they all came to Cadillac and had a big wedding, outside wedding, and a lot of beer and drinking and everything. And one of the nurses met one of the guys from Beaver Island, and that is Skip McDonough. And so they got to like each other real well, and eventually they got married and settled to Beaver Island. And they've been here. She's been here all that time. Let me see. Well, after that, as far as work, I worked as a milkman, side by side. I mean, door by door.
Here on the island? Or
No, in Birmingham and Pontiac and Southport, down that way. And I loved it. It was outside. Just loved the job. And of course, with 5 little kids, we had five children in 6 years. So there was always plenty of milk to drink and ice cream and stuff like that. But eventually, the door-to-door milkman was kind of out the window. So I had to go to work at Pontiac Motors. At the assembly line, I was a supervisor, I'm the supervisor, for 22 years. And all this time, I was going to night school, and it was not a regular college, it was a business college. So I paired up with a friend, another veteran of the Korean War, and one night we were studying tax laws, and we were comparing, markets to this competition to each other. And I tapped him on the shoulder, and I said, "Why don't we start a little tax business and put a little ad in the paper, and maybe we could start doing taxes." We would go to people's house for $5 in some pretty bad neighborhoods. So we did that for quite a while, 2 or 3 years, and then we split up because he wanted to work in his basement, and I wanted to do it on the road. So everything was fine with friends and everything was split up. And I did that all the time then for 50 years. The same thing, went by door by door. No computers, just a little calculator like that. I had about 300 clients. Some of them stayed with me for many, many years. Four families stayed with me for the whole 50 years, different generations and everything. Well, then in 2005, in the meantime, my wife died quite suddenly in 1983.
What was your wife's name?
Her name, Ruth Ann.
Ruth Ann.
Yeah.
Okay. And was she originally from the island, or was she just a nurse?
She was originally from Cadillac.
Cadillac,
yeah,
okay. But she wrote to you, okay.
From there, because she was still in training, in nurse training. She died quite suddenly with a hemorrhage in the brain, and they couldn't. Her high blood pressure was too high, and she just couldn't make it. So I never did find anybody else to get married, or I never did live with any woman, or did anything like that. We were talking about that, and just in the distance. A little bit. So anyway, let me see what after that. Oh. After my wife died, I joined a group called the Nomads, and they came out of Detroit, and they had their own plane, a big plane. It carried 80 patients, and we traveled all over the world, including one trip we went all the way around the world in 28 days, 28 for 28,000 miles. Wow. We did, and just had a great time. But eventually, and then I traveled a lot more. I traveled over 100,000 miles with this group. We had most people were quite wealthy, and I found that they were kind of snooty.
Oh.
Although I always had some people there was always like some women there traveling, quite a bunch of them, that were single women that husband didn't want to go, or for one reason or another. So we had a lot of fun. We just had a lot of fun.
That's good.
But it got too expensive. So when 9/11 came along, I was coming back from Germany, Frankfurt, and on that afternoon we were playing cards, and we got on the plane and we headed for New York. We were over Greenland, and the pilot said we had to turn around. So we went back back to Frankfurt. They put them up in a beautiful hotel. The Frankfurt hotels were already filled, so we went to a resort hotel way up in the mountains on the river now, Danudes, I think, and we stayed there for 6 or 7 days, and I loved it because I know the married people were awful upset about their pills and their kids and their dog and everything, and I was enjoying it. I enjoyed it all. But eventually we got back home again, and then I stopped traveling at that time. But I have traveled all the provinces of Canada, including Upper Labrador. I drove to Alaska twice, broke down on one of the trips. I went to almost all of the states, except that I didn't want to go, like New Jersey. And I drove back and forth to California for 19 times, back and forth with my little pickup. I guess that brings you right up to pleasant time.
Yeah.
Pleasant time.
That's great. You've had good times.
Had a good time, and the kids turned up reasonably well. There was two or three of them went through divorces, which was too bad.
Yeah.
But all in all, they did pretty good. Yeah, they'll be all coming. All of them be coming before August.
Another question, if we could go back in time a little bit.
Sure.
I was wondering if you knew anything about what your grandparents or even great grandparents, I don't know if you knew them at all, what their lives were like here on the island, like day to day,
My great grandfather was a fisherman, and he did other things, a little bit of farming, things like that. Okay. And even he and his sons, they left to work in the woods as a logger in the UP.
And what were their names? What was your great-grandfather's name?
Pete McCauley. Okay. They called him Black Pete because of black beard. He's in the museum. Oh. My grandmother, I didn't know her very well, because they had already passed. But they're buried together in Gladstone, I believe, in Michigan. I go to visit the grave once in a while.
Okay.
My grandmother always she was a farmer. She didn't work anywhere else. And my grandfather always did brick hole. Yeah. And my mother, after my mother got into the post office, he wangled a clerk job for my mother. By that time, the kids gone and everything, and they lived up above the post office. So on a typical day, my dad come build the fires and stuff and get going. Come lunchtime, my mother would fix his lunch, and he would go upstairs and have lunch and have a little drink, and then my mother would come down to the post office and work for during, say, 2 or 3 hours or something like that. Mm-hmm. So when they retired, they both got a pension. So they were pretty good, in good shape then, money-wise.
That's good.
At one point too, when my sisters inherited the post office, I didn't want to be a landlord, so I bought out a portion of the post office. So I don't have anything to do with it. And any other question?
I guess, how would you describe your mother or your father? Like, what were they like?
Okay, that's interesting. My mother was Scotch, kind of straight-laced, not much loving. I don't remember any hugging or kissing or anything like that. And that was kind of typical of that time. My dad was a romantic guy, and he loved to dance, he liked to sing, he liked to drink, but they stayed together for 66 years, and they fought like cats and dogs, but never, no overhitting, and I never heard them do any swearing or bad language. As mad as they'd be mad as either, but they never talked like that at all. I guess it's a typical marriage these days, where they have a few little fights. And they died after they got very sick. They were all in the 80s, both, and they had to go into a nursing home. Nursing home in Ann Arbor. They died there. My dad died in the night, and my mother was vegetable. She couldn't move or talk or anything, but she'd smile and she'd reach to my hands once in a while. We knew that she was paying attention. That we cared, and my 4 sisters did a wonderful job taking care of my parents. Really good job.
Okay. So,
Yes.
what years were you living here on the island?
I was born in 1930, and I left the island in 1947 when I graduated from high school, and then came home almost every summer.
Every summer,
yeah.
Could you tell us any stories from your childhood? Like early on, here on Beaver Island?
In fact, I was going to show you a place in town. I had a good friend who both had a dog, and they're both named Rex. We used to harness our dogs. My dog was fairly small, the other dog was real big. So we would make harnesses, and we would hitch up the dogs and like race and stuff like that. So one day we were going across the ice, and they had cut ice there to harvest, and it was covered with snow, and we fall through the ice with the dog and the sled, and me and my friend Perry all went through. Perry managed to get up in the ice, and I can't swim to this day. I can't swim. The dog scratched into the ice, and the sled floated. And the dog pulled the sled, and I pulled it, and the dog rescued me, pulled me out. Yeah, big dog, and I was rescued by him. That was a big deal. I was about 15 or 16, maybe 15. And I had to run really fast because it was awfully cold. And of course, we ran. So fortunately, we both lived right close, just a few houses over. So we shivered for a long time, but ever since I've been afraid of the water, and I still am. Let's see, stories?
Well, what was school like here on the island?
Well, the little school was over by the cemetery over there, and it was called Sunnyside. And there were all the grades were there. We're taught by the nuns. I started early. I started when I was 5, no kindergarten. And the first day I got beaten up by another kid, and I didn't like the situation very well at all. I didn't have any friends at home or anything, and so when I got home, I didn't like this idea of getting beaten up. So, and it never happened again. But we had to walk from the farmhouse there to, and this is the story that everybody tells, how you walked in the snow in the wintertime. Well, we did. I've got pictures. I should have brought them. I should have brought them. We walked about 1.5 miles in the snow together, my oldest sister and I. Let me see. When I was in the 3rd grade at Sunnyside, I was the only child, the only one in the 3rd grade. Later, we got to town. The people, when I was in the 4th grade, the smaller children were downstairs, and then they go up the stairs, and high school was above, so all in the same building. So when you got up to the 4th, you went upstairs to the 8th grade, and then we went into another part of a building, but once you got to be high school. And I hated school, every bit of it, but I did a lot of reading, and I did a lot of studying, and I did a lot of writing and composition, things like that. And I was no good at athletics at all. There wasn't much athletics anyway. But I because of that, I never got interest in sports of any kind. I never goes to a ball game and nothing like that. I just have no interest in sports at all. And that's because of that, because we didn't have very much. But I was more interested in learning about the world, the history. I loved history and things like that.
That's good. So when you were young, since you technically live, in the country. Or
in the country. Haysiders.
You're Haysiders. Did you have very much interaction with the kids in town, or?
Oh yeah, I had a very small, a little group of people. I guess I was a loner to some extent, but we had a group of 3. One boy a little bit older than me and a little younger than me, and I was in the middle. And we hung around and we played Monopoly for day after day. Mm-hmm. And one of the young boys had a pool table. And it belonged to the Coast Guard, and so we could use it. And so we'd go up there and play pool. We hunted some and shot rabbits a little bit. I never did very much on that, but had a good time. But the younger of the 3 went hunted one day, and he was about 15.
What was his name first?
His name was Billy Gallagher.
Oh.
His friend had a truck with a flat bed on it, and they pulled those shotguns off the truck, and the hammer. These were old antique things, and the hammers were like that, and one of the catches fired and blew a hole in his stomach about this big around, and he only lived for days afterwards. So that was sad. But it was nice to have a few friends like that, and then those 3 guys like myself, we didn't have any interest in sports.
Mm. Who were the other ones where you're good friends?
One was George Van Urkel.
Oh.
And his sister married a guy from Beaver Island too, and she's still living. George, he was very artistic, very artistic. He could carve, in fact he did, a complete set of crib for Christmas cribs with a little box to put it into. Little people like this big and gave it to one of our nuns, our teaching. He could do anything that had to do with carving and stuff. But I lost time. I think he's passed away, but he was a little older than me. I guess you could say it was a good boyhood, yeah, when I never was in jail. Of course, didn't have a jail, so I didn't go to jail. I didn't drink very much, as most of the and a little older. A lot of them drank a lot. I mean, a lot for a lot of years, and that possibly because I'm still around. Most of them my age. I think there's about 2 that are left of that group. They died quite young.
What about things you would do in the summer? Were there like dances and stuff, or maybe those were during the year too, like school dances?
Yeah, well, yeah, I wasn't very good at that either. I couldn't dance very good. Yes, we did have, and I liked those parties. We would have house parties, and I liked those. We would go out in the country somewhere, and then they'd roll back. In fact, once or twice they had it at our house. Expect to celebrate elections when my dad would run for an office, and then they would have a big party for him.
You would run for office here?
No, at the farmhouse.
Right, but on Beaver Island.
Oh yeah, Beaver Island. I never left Beaver Island until I was 16, and ever I didn't go for anywhere in Charlotte. And then I hitchhiked to Ferndale, Michigan, for a couple of days, and then came back. Other than that, I didn't go anywhere off the island until I was 17. That's when I left. I was on my own by that time, you know.
So did you ever have to help your grandparents or parents with work when you're living
Yes.
on the island? Yeah.
When my grandparents, by the time we had 5 kids, they decided that the old folks would move to another house, and it's still there, that yellow house up by the township hall. They lived there for quite a long time, and I would go in and cut wood for them and come and take care of them. My sisters didn't. Well, my sister didn't have anything to do with that kind of thing. She was very attractive and very popular, and she had a gang, and she could sing and all kind of stuff. Just a completely opposite. So she and I didn't get along. We didn't fight. We just ignored each other, you know. But yes, I would help, and I favor that because I liked the fact that I helped my grandfather my grandparents when they were really old. I would go over and stay overnight, and when my grandparents died, the wake was taken in that little yellow house, and I sit there after everybody went home. I just sat there with my grandparents, and my grandmother, she was Irish, 100% Irish, and she knew about keening. Have you heard about keening? Where old Irish people, they have a terrible moaning kind of and crying thing. It's classic with Irish. And I remember throwing down on when my grandfather died first, and she threw down on the casket and just screamed and hollered, and I didn't know at the time that people do that in Ireland all the time. Called keening. In fact, you can hire a person to do the keening for you. Anything else? I'm talking too much.
No, it's wonderful. One question I was wondering about was when the Irish side of your family first came over here, or any of the other Irish families. Do you know what the biggest sort of changes they faced when they first came to Beaver Island compared to their life living actually in Ireland?
Yes, very much. In 1856, I believe, was the time of the when people were starving, the English was driving people Ireland across Ireland and into the West Country, and they would give them just, and I've been there several times, they would have just a little place for their cows and stuff like that with stone walls all the way around it. So the people from there, the English wanted to get those people out of there anyway, and they were starving, and I've seen pictures where they would be a little hut with a family in underneath, and they would go by and they'd look inside, and the whole family had starved right there. And people were on the road, they would eat grass, and their mouth was all green from eating grass. It was a terrible situation. There's a book that explains it really well. Okay, so the people that eventually went to Beaver Island, my people went to Johnstown, Pennsylvania, and worked in the steel mills for just a short time, and they found the Irish people were very literate, and they wrote to everybody and back and forth to the old country, and everything was just great for reading. So anyway, they would learn, well, there's this place on Beaver Island where you can draw potatoes, and you can get 10 acres if you want, and there's no king and everything. So they were gladly to come to Beaver Island, and most of them settled up what we call up the country in the farms. And yes, they were thrilled together. Of course, the winters were bad, but they did happy to be farmers and could enough to eat, you know. Even in the Depression, when my grandfather had just a little pension from the bricklayers, and other than that, they had no money coming in, none at all. They'd have enough money to get salt and flour, and everything else was hand. And my grandmother, she would sell a dozen of eggs or something like that. And we ate good, even in the Depression. When you read about the cities, the bread lines and things like that in the big city, like Chicago was one. We didn't have that. We didn't know we were poor, for one thing, and we had always such to eat. Now, a lot of times that we would have maybe it's called cornbread with syrup on it. You know, that'd be the main dinner. And we'd have fish, a lot of fish. There was always a good get fish. We could go right down to the fishermen, and my mother would say, how big a fish you want, and I'd go down and get it, and she'd cook it, and most of us like to eat the fish. Mm-hmm. So we did all right, pretty well with it during that time.
Another question I have is sort of in light of the booming fishing industry, I was wondering if any sort of class distinction or division ever developed between like the fishermen here on the island and like say the farmers or any other occupations, like people.
I would say a friendly ivory or ivory. No, that's not the word. But the people in town, they were a little bit they were the merchants, you know. People had the stores and the fishermen, and they did pretty bad. So they were a little bit like McDonough's, for example. They always lived a little bit better. They had just better car and all kind of stuff. A lot of people didn't have any car at all. Mm-hmm. A lot of times my dad didn't have any car. We'd walk to school, walk to church. The church was up there, you know. Like for the stations during Lent, we would all get together and we walk up to church where the cemetery is there now, and in the dark. And groups of it would go work there, and then later they cut the church in two pieces and took it to where it still is. Yeah, mm-hmm. Yeah. So we're a little closer. We walk to school, of course, but once we got in town, all the kids walked to school. There were no buses. Mm-hmm. I think it was a good life because it appreciated the things that we had, and also I think it was healthy. We were out in the cold all the time, and doing outside things, didn't, except we played a lot of Monopoly. It's still.
That's good.
Yes.
One question that Dr. Ottman had was if you knew anything about the relationship between the farming and the fishing industry and sort of the combination of the two, because from like listening to interviews and everything, you get a sense that like a lot of families might be farmers, but like one son might go off and be a fisherman, and like, do you know if like a lot of those sons who would go off and be fishermen, would they be working for like, would they be fishing just to bring fish back to their own families, or would they be like working on one of the fisher families' boats and be commercially fishing? Like, do you know anything about
The fishermen who had their boats, and at one time there's 20 some would go out every morning, and they mostly worked with the Indians. The young men who were had not their families so much, but the Indians would work, and then they would work, and then they get paid on Saturday or Sunday, and then they'd miss till they'd skip Monday, and then they'd go back to work again. No, the young people from the island, both in town and out in the country, they went sailing. The thing was to go sailing in the big boats, and many of them stayed with us. Some of them became captains. But I had a terrible bad part about being sickness, and I didn't want to be anything to do with boats.
Mm-hmm.
So no, I wouldn't say there's a rival. No, then also some of the people a little bit younger than I, when they'd be like in the 20s or so, they could live in the island and work in CCC. Don't know all the latter, but it's for forestry camps, tramping trees and stuff like that. So when they didn't have anything at all, they would go to the CC camps.
Okay.
And of course the sailors, when December came along, the young men all came home, and then they did a lot of partying and parties and things like that. Until there wasn't no unemployment at that time, but they would come home with their families and then ship out again in the spring. And I never was glad. I never regretted that I did that, because it wouldn't be my kind of thing at all.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, what did you miss most when you left Beaver Island to be on your own around 16 or 17? What was so different?
I was very independent. I probably missed my family the first Christmas. I remember that. And I was only 18 then. I didn't get a chance to come back for that Christmas. I was pretty much take out in the city life. I don't know how. I don't know why. I got well over that. But what I meant, well, like I say, we're not a really close family. My mother wouldn't probably, when I'd go away, she wouldn't cry or anything like that. They're just, I guess I didn't miss anything. I want adventure. I want to get out and see the world, and I've always been that way. And by then, of course, then you come back again in Beaver Island. Always come back, everybody.
Is it what you thought it would be when you came back?
It was a little better. At that time I left, there was only 250 people left. It was almost deserted. And by that time, the tour business started build up, and so the fixing some of the old buildings and starting new business and stuff like that. But I never resented any of that either. You know, some people say, "Oh, well, we've always done this way." I like improvements. I like new things. Every time you see something new, I like to see it. Yeah, I like new things.
Could you talk a little bit about the the logging industry and how it affected life on Beaver Island? Do you know anything about that? 'Cause
The logging was pretty much all over by that time. There was a few camps. They started one when I was a teenager, and some of the young people did work there in the mills. And they made hammers and handles. I can't say that word. Roquet.
I'm
The
not
game
sure.
of.
Oh, croquet.
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Oh,
They made them here.
those.
There was a mill here that did. And there's some at the museum. There's some that were made there.
Yeah.
Logging, no, I would say when like in the 20s when they had the railroad going through there and everything, that was a really big deal. But by that time, it kind of died down.
Was there, besides being the postmaster, would your father do anything else?
No.
I don't know, any odd job? Because, I know a lot of people here just sort of do whatever they can, to make money.
Boodlers.
But, yeah.
You heard the term boodlers?
Oh,
Have you heard the
yeah.
term? Yeah.
You didn't do any
No.
of that, but I just meant
But not my dad. He was in the postmaster. It was a good job for that time. He was making $3,000 a year, and that. In fact, they were able to send 3 of them all went to college, and that was quite rare at that time. I wanted to go to the University of Michigan, and I wanted to study forestry, of all things. I was kind of a loner, and I liked to go out in the woods and do, watch animals and stuff like that. But I got nicely over that.
you know a lot about the loons here.
Yes, I know it's a loon.
That's great.
But I have a really love for the old home place, and it's particularly Font Lake, and particularly when I had a stroke and I was recovering, and I couldn't speak or anything. I could write my name there, couldn't any at all. And the 2 things I really wanted to do is save the tax business, which I couldn't do anymore, and get back to Beaver Island and work in the bushes. And I got a strong love for the island.
Do you want to share any of your favorite memories of the island? Growing up or spending your summers here?
Let me see. We always we stayed in the farmhouse, and then didn't have the other house. And my wife didn't particularly love the island at that time. She would come because I wanted her to come. But with 4 little kids and no bathroom, just the outhouse, and no plumbing, so it was pretty rough for a while. Eventually, she got to really love the island. She had a lot of friends on the island too. I think of really good times. I really can't think of anything for that, particular things.
Just like Font Lake and going out on a boat.
And being out, that kind of thing, yeah.
Nice.
And ice fishing. After school, there wasn't much to do, and I built a shanty. That was the first thing I'd ever built, a nice little shanty with a little stove and a little chimney, and I would go after school, and I'd warm up the little shanty and fish through the hole, and there were a lot of fish. You could let fish really easy, and that was one of the things I did a lot of times, like in high school.
Would you ever go sledding or anything like that?
A little bit, yeah. There was sometime the town kids would get together and build a fire on the hills, just in a particular area over in here. They would get together and sled. Yeah, I did some of that a little bit. I wasn't really good at anything athletic, but some people just aren't, I guess.
That's good.
I used to help kids, and the one fellow is Bud McDonough that started the store, or was it? He had trouble with the math and stuff like that, and I would help him quite a bit, and eventually become not rich, but I mean very, very successful.
So when you were growing up, who were some of the old timers who lived on the island? Do you remember any stories
Yes,
about them?
and especially out in the country, there were a number of old bachelors, mostly Irish, and our neighbor right next door, he was what do you call it? He stayed home all the time. He lived alone. He didn't mix with other people very much. They would come over to our house. He didn't have a radio, and he didn't have a well, so he would come over. This is in the 30s, and my dad had a little battery radio, so he would come over and he'd listen to the radio about the fights and the boxing and things like that. Well, you can only play the radio for maybe an hour at night because you have to buy batteries from Sears Roebuck, and they're quite expensive. So we held way back on there. I always liked music. I really liked music, and especially country music. I loved it. Still do. Let's see about that. Oh, yes. There were a number of bachelors, and sometimes in case a brother and sister that had a farmhouse and never got married. There's other brothers that stayed in the farmhouses. There was a number of those, and a lot of them were drinkers. I was telling you about the guy that froze to death.
Oh yeah, could you tell that story?
Okay, that's kind of interesting. His name was Charlie Anthony, and he lived alone. And he would go to town and go to the Shamrock. He would drink too much and get squirrelsome. And so they'd throw him out of the Shamrock. And he'd go home. I think he probably walked home. I don't think he had a horse. But he was about 4 miles out in the country. And he lived in an old log house. And after 3 or 4 days, they didn't know where Charlie was. So somebody to check on him. And he was drunk. And he got in his house, went on the bed with all his clothes on, and he froze to death. Right there.
In his house?
In his house, yeah. So he would been there for 3 or 4 days. So they took him to town, and at that time the Shamrock they were closed most of the time at that time in the deep winter, but they had a little bit of heat on there. So they took Charlie and stretched him up in the Shamrock with a low fire to thaw him out, so that they could bury him. So there was a house right from here, just a few houses over, belonged to relatives, and they always have wakes. That's one thing I always like to go to wakes. I loved them. So I would, they had closed casket. But Jewel Gillespie wanted to see Charlie, and they wouldn't open the casket. Well, I slid in and peeked around, and Charlie was all pink, and there was frost came out of his face, and thawing him out so he could bury him.
And why do they think that happened, that he froze to death in his house? Did he just not have any blankets on him?
I think he wasn't able to build a fire, I think.
Oh, okay.
There was no other heating except wood, and you had to be reasonably sober in order to find the wood and get going and everything.
So one night would have been all it would have taken?
Yeah, and it was pretty cold during that time.
Was that common at all? People having incidents like that in the cold, traveling from one place to another?
Not very much at that time. That was very unusual. But I'll tell you what was common in warm weather, and some people cannot believe that's like this. People would leave the Shamrock, and they'd be drunk, and they'd head for home, and they'd find them just laying there in the grass between the beach cameras and the Shamrock, and there he'd be. Clarence Palmer was one. And the Indians, quite often, they'd find them just different places up in the sand or something, and they'd just stay there till somebody sober up enough to go home. Sometimes the Irish people, they fought a lot, especially country people. They'd go to town, and they'd get drunk with one another, and Archie, the manager of the Shamrock, he would have the Lafreniere, yeah. Alvin's father. Yeah, Archie. Yeah, you do Alvin?
Uncle, right? Or
Yeah, no, his father.
Father? Yeah.
And so they could go outside, and they'd fight like crazy, and everybody cheer them on and everything, and then they'd shake hands and go home. They were just great fighters, fur fighters. Simple little things. And those things that I remember, because that are unique from the island. Those things like that.
Did your father ever go to the Shamrock?
Yes, not so much when we were young. But later on, he took a liking to whiskey. But he was a happy drunk. He always, he could dance and he could sing, and he would hide from my mother, and he would keep it in the back of the trunk. And one day he went to get a whiskey at where the community center is, the same building, and he left the car running to go in his, and it rolled down into the lake, and somebody had to help him pull him out, get him out of the lake. Yeah, people all like to tell that story of my dad. There was a lot of stories about my dad. He was just a happy guy. He loved the island. Well, for one time, there was one period over 25 years that he didn't even go to Charlotte. He had no desire to. My mother would go because her family was in Pontiac, and she had a big family. And no, he just stayed home. When he finally had to leave, he cried. I remember they put him on with my sister and brother-in-law, and my brother-in-law had a plane, and we were taking them back to go to nursing home, and they were putting him in the airport, and he was crying. It was so sad. He didn't want to leave that island. Do you need to know, what do you want to know about my personal, not history, I don't mean that, mental site or anything like that, psychiatry or psychology, anything like that? Is there anything that you want to know? I'm pretty much an open book. Really, very simple. I don't hide anything.
Another question I was just curious about was in your grandparents, parents, and then your time, how Was transportation pretty difficult when you first
Yes.
were born and everything? Like,
Oh, yes, yeah.
so you mostly walked everywhere, or?
Oh, yes, we did a lot, especially in the wintertime. My dad would usually have a car, but they wouldn't run with flat tires and everything. But I probably said first, when I was born in the middle of February, the doctor came from town. The neighbor brought him over on a sled, you know. And my mother, very, very small, and she was having a real difficulty with the delivery. So the doctor sent somebody, another nurse who was his wife, to help with the delivery. Then they sent a lady, an Irish lady, who was what do you call with women that do
Midwife?
midwife. So they, in the meantime, it's just a raging blizzard, just terrible. And finally, to this day, I have a big head, and that's part of the reason. My sisters, they were born at home, and they no problem with them, just me. But yeah, the weather was a big factor those days. But we went to school every day, and you know, I was 5, and I was working or walking with older kids, and that was just a normal thing.
And your sisters went to school too, and then what work would they do? Did they do work, like, did they help in the house, or did they ever?
Very much.
Not very much.
Just the dishes, something like
Mm-hmm.
that. Neither one of us did, even my dad. I didn't have to do very much work either. You know, my mother did all the work. Oh, and the house was always clean. Everything was.
Was she in charge of the house?
Yeah, nothing. I never had to do anything for girls. What you school work? I didn't have to do anything like that.
Mm.
But of course, religion was a big part in our life. You know, we're very strict Catholics, and they are. Let's see, all of them still are, yeah. And most of the grandchildren, well, about half of them are still with the church.
Were there many non-Catholics on the island when your
Very
grandparents?
few, I think.
Very
There
few.
were about 4.
Oh,
The
really?
Pishners were Protestants. There was no other church at that time. You know, there was either you went with the Catholic Church or you didn't go without.
Did the so was the church sort of the center of social life too?
Oh, very much. And the priest was very much in charge. I mean, like any decisions we had, there were no judges or anything like that. So there was a problem with anybody, they'd go to the priest.
Who's the priest when you were growing up? Do you know
My father, Bordeaux was the one I was baptism at that time. But they never no scandal about the priests at that time. They were doing as well as they could. I don't think they particularly liked to be on Beaver Island because Beaver Island was kind of, and they stood there this day, they were ornery, you know, they wanted to do their own thing, and so he had to, you know, rein them in a little bit sometimes. And about the drinking, you know, they had some kind of a program where they want people to be sober. I forget what they call it now, but there's a lot of problem with families where the father was mean. A lot of my friends, the fathers were mean and heavy drinkers, but not my dad. And when didn't drink at all when he was young. When we were at home, I've never seen him drunk. But after he had nobody kids around, he started drinking more.
And then, did you say when your farmhouse was first built?
1904.
Okay.
And my dad was born in 03.
Okay.
just as the house was be finished.
So it was, your grandfather build it then?
Well, they hired.
Or they hired?
Yeah, they hired to do it.
Okay.
My grandfather did the masonry work and stuff like that, but no, the skilled carpenters.
Okay.
With not all, but a lot of the wood was from the island, but some of the fancy drum they got it from mainland somewhere. It was one of the better homes, not the largest, not the best, but it was. But you see, during say in the 40s or so, and we were starting to leave and everything, and we let the house go, and like the porches had balls from down, the ceiling was coming out and things like that. And eventually, when I graduated, my dad wanted me to work on that house and do what he could do with to make the porches and paint it. I painted that house. I know 40 years I painted that house, like one side at a time when you come in the summertime, even after we had kids. We worked really hard on that because we loved that old house and we wanted to stay in good shape. And then now my brother-in-law did some, and my son Pat does, and we all take a hand at the house, and people come to look at it. It's kind of a special house. Yeah. They say you can't go back, but here you can. Here you can go where we started.
Did the farming sort of stop on that house when, like, your dad and mom sort of worked at the post office, or?
Oh yeah, he didn't. Yeah, around that time, and my grandparents were very old, and there was no more farming after that. My dad had potatoes for a while, but he wasn't really. He might study about farming, have a book about it or something, but he was destined to be a clerical person. That was his thing. Yeah.
Do you have any stories about your cousin Ed Macaulay, or?
Well, no, I only studied him maybe 4 years ago. That's when I discovered
That's when you
him.
found him. Oh.
Yeah, he came with some. There's a lot of the families came to study the roots, you know. And there's an awful lot of them. And I do a lot of genealogy. I've a big study of it, and I wrote to people and told them, if you have the information, I'll help you. And then I would invite people to come and everything, and all except one family. Their name was Briggs, and they had 11 children, and they never came back to the island to study anything about the island. It's kind of strange, really, but I've got big books and books about genealogy. I was the only one that really cared very much of it, you know. But I'm glad I did now.
So do you know how he's related to you? Like,
yeah. Yes, Pete Macaulay, that started all the family. His oldest son was named Ed, and Ed fell through the dock in town and drowned. And his wife was over on High Island with 7 children. So when he died, the fishermen brought him, got the body back, went over to get the wife and the children from High Island, and there was no way of making a living at all. So the wife, the widow, and the 5 children, they took them to the farmhouse, and for the winter they kept the winter until they left the island. And what were you saying? I forgot you got off your subject. My subject there. Oh, the relations?
Yeah.
No, none of them lived here. I had 1 or 2 grandmother sisters from UP that would come once in a while, and 1 or 2 worked on the boats, like the lighthouse road or tenders, and we would come sometime to visit us, and there was a big dig for us. We didn't very many people from Pontiac either. Sometimes my grandparents' people would come, and that'd be a really big deal. We didn't have much company when we lived at that time when we were small. If a car would come to turn around or anything, we'd get all excited. We'd go, a car coming, a car coming, a car coming. It was a big deal. But I don't have any regrets. I think it's pretty good life. Yeah, it was a pretty good life.
So overall, would you say like Beaver Island's sort of always been a pretty tight-knit community where everyone just like contributes in their own way and sort of just cycles?
Yes, I think so. There was factions. There was cliques. Like sometimes, one family would be mad at somebody else. It's only in small towns you run that. There'd be somebody that you don't anybody that's a Gallagher. You don't like them or something like that. But to minimum. But they had to work together, because we weren't rich, so people had to work together. And it's more now than ever, And recreation for children and children's age, there was nothing to do, almost nothing. You could do Shamrock at night. We would go in there, underage and everything. There was just nothing to do at all. And some of the people that moved here, they began getting some activities for the youth. So the main thing was just ride around in cars and drink. It was sad, but, and I didn't do very much of it, really.
Yeah, actually, you mentioned a lot that your family wasn't very close. Do you think that if you were, you would have stayed on the island longer, or did you leave for other reasons?
Yeah, because I went to one trip, and I wanted to go. I wanted to leave the island, and I wanted to work in the city. Yeah. My parents were not trying to leave by any reason. I left. They wanted. There was no big fight about it or anything. I wanted to go. I was an adventure. But there was a big incident came right at that time when I left in 46, 47. My older sister was very attractive, and she got pregnant to some guy on the island. And this was very common, but they almost would marry the same guy, and it worked out for a lot of people like that. So the guy that my parents thought was the father, there was a big squabble over that, who might be, and they should marry this girl. And some of the families, some of the Gillespies, they didn't want to. The suspected father, they didn't want to marry her. So she and some single women from the island, they moved to Flint or Detroit, something like that. And there wasn't much, it was a lot of shame to it at that time, a lot of shame. And because of that, she hardly ever came back to the island. She got to be very wealthy. She had a boyfriend, and she didn't say very much about the island. For years and years, she wouldn't go at all. She'd come from my parents' funerals, and that's about all. She's still around. She's in a nursing home or a assisted living. But she and I, now I see her once in a while, I really care about my sister, but we never did show it. Nobody showed any emotion like that.
Did your other sisters or most of the other kids your age, was that their plan, just to leave right after high school, or?
Yes, they both wanted to go into nursing, and they did. They were nurses. The third one, she was born, her name was Colleen, and she came much late. They were a change of life. She was born in 44. And when all us kids had left the island, she can't even remember any of her sisters because she was raised like a single person, and she became a social worker, and she had several degrees into that type of thing. My sisters did really well. They had good husbands, and they did well. There was one. My daughter Colleen married a former priest, and that didn't work out very good. So she's still single.
Mm.
But they get with that really. Of the three of them, they all get together really well. I mean, they're very close with each other. And they like me, they'd be nice to me. They wanted me to go to eat a couple of nights, and then tonight they want to come again and stuff like that. I usually say no. I'd rather play Room Cube with you. And Abby. Do you know Abby?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
She's
real
here.
nice too.
Yeah, she's very nice.
Anything else? You must run out of tape or whatever you do with us.
Yeah, this has been wonderful, I think.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rod. Actually, do you know anything about the house we're excavating at, by any chance?
Do what?
Do you know anything about the house that we're doing the archaeology dig at? The Donny Galligan house?
Sure, a lot.
Did you ever know the people who lived there?
Oh, very much.
Oh, you did?
Patty and Mary.
Could you talk about them?
Yeah, they were both short, fat people, round. They never had any children. And he was a bootlegger, and during Depression, during that time, and when it was Prohibition time. Well, he had quite a business going with home. A number of people had made whiskey, and people would go to Patty's house to get his little jar of whiskey. And I can understand when they cleared that upstairs, there was a lot of bottles down there, and most people didn't know about that. It's only recently people. My dad knew it out, but then when they died, Mary was 100, and she's on the tombstone, 100. And Patty died first, I think, and then they inherited the Gallagher family, Peter. And I knew them very well too. They were from first Irish, first generation. They were real Irish, both the father and mother, and they were a little bit, what should I say? Not dumb, but just a little bit below. There were several families around where they were slightly low intelligent, I guess you'd say. And they were one of them, but they were very outgoing, and they were great dancers, the best dancers. They were just wonderful dancers. And mostly they worked labor, like working on the wheel and into logging and stuff like that. The Doneys. The name Doney comes from, it's Dan. His name was Dan Gallagher, but the Irish they changed it to Doney because that's the way they speak the name. So he was, all the Doneys were there, and there was nicknames. Everybody had nicknames on the island, because there were so many big families, and you had, well, is this from? There was one woman and she was a good friend of my mother's, and she didn't know her father at all, and so to call her, she was instead of speaking of the father, her name was Patty Mary Ellen, because his mother was and so everybody from that family was in the Mary Ellen, because there was no dad around. Everybody had a nickname. They used to call my dad, when my mother got to the island, when she would call her Gracie Frank. There was other Franks, so she was Gracie Frank. And my dad was Frankie, of course, Slow Frankie. And they had that post office for so long. When they had they had to name most of the streets. And when somebody, I think it was Jim Mogen, they named that street Frankie Lane, from an old country singer. So that's Frankie Lane was in honor of my dad, which I thought was nice. I didn't do it, but I think it was really nice.
Why was he called Slow Frank?
Did everything very proud. When he'd go into church, and he was always late coming to church. And he's always smoked a pipe, and except it wasn't he was sleeping and he was in church, and then he'd smoke. And then lazy cigars afterwards. He was very healthy. But he'd come in wandering in there to mass, and he'd start in church, and like the Father and the Son, and like the Father goes like that, and people laughed about that. He did everything. When we worked at the post office, they'd have to close the window while he'd disturb they called it disturb, to distribute the mail. Everybody's in the lobby waking, especially on Christmas time, and he'd just take his time. Everything he did very slowly. And I guess that's why he died, or lived to be 89 and a half.
Did your mother have a nickname at all?
No, she never did. She was kind of straight-laced. She wasn't mean or anything, but she wanted everything to be right. Yeah.
She kept everything in order.
In order, yeah. She was very good with figures. She'd be on the school board and stuff like that. Very intelligent, yeah. And she drank hardly, probably like zero, drank hardly at all, ever.
Did you ever have a nickname, or did you name any of your friends or anything like that?
Let's see. One time I had a nickname. I guess I've forgotten about that. Yeah. Be early in the game when I was really small. I had a cat, and they tried to make a name of Tinkerbell something or other, and I'd come in town at the gas station or something and say, "What's the name of your cat?"
Tinkerbell. Oh. That's great. You've helped us a lot. Thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, I'm glad.
It's been great.
It's kind of useless information, really, but I kind of enjoy doing it.
Well, thank you again.
It was great to hear your story.
Thank you.